we'll talk about the classical and the Keynesian models of an economy. Okay? And as I said, I think the classical model was valid probably, at least for the United States, up until about the 1930s. And then when Keynes came along, because the classical model could not explain long-term persistent unemployment. Okay? As we're going to see, according to the classical model, it's not possible to be involuntarily unemployed long-term. Okay? That you're going to be out of job for frictional reasons, right? You told your boss he's a jerk and he fired you. Or for structural reasons, right? That's done by a robot now. We don't need people for that. But there should not be any cyclical unemployment, at least not long-term. Okay? The reason being is that in the classical model, okay, like all other markets, the labor market will go to equilibrium. This is calibrated? Okay. All right. Getting closer, closer. Okay? That if there was a surplus of labor, that meant that the wage rate was too high. That price of labor would come down to eliminate it, okay? So that there wouldn't be any long-term unemployment. As we're going to see in the classical model, the economy is always self-adjusting, okay? That corrections will automatically be made to make sure that we always end up in the classical model on that long-run aggregate supply curve, okay? In fact, in the classical model, there is only one supply curve. This is going to drive me insane. Okay? That's why they only had one. Supply curve, vertical, full employment. We're always going to be at full employment. Won't be any difference between the long run and the short run, okay? We're always going to be at full employment. Keynes came along and said that there's been some fundamental changes in the American economy that make this classical model no longer valid. Remember, in the classical model, okay, remember, aggregate demand in both models is a function of spending by consumers, business, government, and foreigners on our output, okay? And in the classical model, there's only long run and aggregate demand. And what this model shows is that aggregate demand really has nothing to do with long run GDP. Changes in aggregate demand can only change one thing: the price level. Precisely right. Okay? That if AD shifts out, the only thing that's going to change is that we're going to get inflation. Okay? But as we're going to see in the Keynesian model, so what this says is, in the long run, what we produce depends upon resources, okay? It depends upon resources, meaning that once all resources are fully employed, which they will be, okay, then we will be out here, right here, at that level of GDP, the full employment level of real GDP, okay? So that GDP depends upon resources. If we get more resources, what happens? This shifts out. Okay? Long run shifts out and real GDP rises. Or if we get an advance in technology, right, that allows us to get more out of the resources, it's the same curve. Okay, the same thing. What we can produce, if we get more resources, advance in technology, we can produce more. Okay? So that doesn't matter about prices or demand. Just matters on how many resources and the level of technology that we have, okay? So in this model, real GDP is 100% determined by supply, and changes in aggregate demand can't change GDP because they can't change resources. The only things that aggregate demand can change is the price level, okay? Now, Keynes came along and said, well, yeah, really, there's also an upward sloping short-run aggregate supply curve. And what this shows is that we can produce, if we start with aggregate demand here, okay, and for some reason aggregate demand shifts out. Now remember why? If we are in equilibrium here, any number of things could cause more purchases at every possible price level. If we have more money to spend, we all get a nice big raise, right? Demand curves shift out. If interest rates fall, more projects for business, more investments become profitable, so more will be undertaken. If the value of the dollar changes so that our goods become less expensive, exports increase, aggregate demand shifts up. Or if the government just decides to increase its purchases, okay? Aggregate demand shifts out, and what happens? We go into, if this level of GDP is the full employment level, any GDP to the right okay, means more than full employment, meaning we are in overtime production. Okay? So in this model, when aggregate demand shifts out, we temporarily go into overtime production, producing more under conditions of overtime than we do under conditions of full employment. Okay? Why is this? As demand shifts out, it causes the price level to go up, but costs remain the same. So as prices rise and costs remain the same, profits increase, manufacturers will have an incentive, a reward, a reason to increase output, okay? But eventually adjustments are going to be made in the economy. Think of any equilibrium point to the right or left of this full employment long run line as unadjusted situation, that adjustments in the economy will be made. In this classical model, adjustments always get made that bring us back to full employment on the long run line, okay? Any GDP to the right or the left is a temporary situation, okay? Adjustments will be made to bring us back here. So what's going to happen now? If we go from here to here, okay? The price level rises, incentives now appear, more profits, output increases, we go into overtime mode, okay? As you can see, this curve gets more and more straight up. What that shows is that even in overtime production, there's a limit to how much we can produce, right? Once machines are running 24 hours a day, that's it. We can't produce anymore. So even if prices rise and profits increase more, too bad, we can't increase output. There's only so many hours people can work anyway, overtime, right? How many hours can you work overtime? I was lucky. Most of my career, I never had to work overtime. It's true. My boss didn't really believe in it. So as long as he was gone, I could leave. I told you about him, didn't I? He owned a house he owns a house up in Maine, right? And on Fridays, he would be anxious to get up to Maine, right? Because the traffic going up to Maine is terrible. And at about 2:30, 3 o'clock, he would say, listen, I'm heading out of here. I'm leaving. When you guys get your work done, you can go home too, okay? And he would go out. We'd all go over to the window and watch him get in his car. And as soon as he was gone, we're gone too. All right. So aggregate demand shifts out, price level rises, profits increase, outputs increase. We go into what's called an expansionary gap. Does your book call it expansionary? Do you know? Some books, it's called also inflationary gap. Could be either one. In fact, you might see it on the exam as one or the other, either inflationary or expansionary. The reason being, the economy has expanded beyond normal full employment, and the increase in aggregate demand has caused, remember what kind of inflation this is called? When the price level goes up because of increases in aggregate demand? It's called demand pull. Demand pull inflation, okay? Right. So we get some inflation, and now what's going to happen? We're going to go back to normal. We're going to end up back on the long run curve. In the classical model, we always end up on the long run curve. Again, any GDP to the right or left is temporary. Okay? I'm going to go on to another one that's not quite so messy. Okay. Okay. Long run curve. Aggregate demand starts here. AD. AD shifts out. Price level rises. We go into this expansionary gap. Okay. This is the full employment level. Now what's going to happen? Well, when we are at full employment, this is how much raw materials. Okay? And how much labor we're using. But in order to produce more under conditions of more than full employment, there's increases in demand for raw materials, increases in demand for labor. As demand for these goods increases, the prices of these goods are now going to begin to rise. Prices of these inputs. Costs are now going to catch up with the increase in the price level. Now adjustments are going to be made in the economy. As costs rise, profits now begin to shrink. Manufacturers no longer have that incentive to work you overtime, okay, to work you at more hours, to work those machines, because the profits have gone, now the costs have gone up. We know what happens to supply curves. When costs rise, supply curves shift inwards. So now the short-run aggregate supply curve is going to shift in, and we're going to end up here, back on the long-run curve, okay? So the process is you start at equilibrium. For whatever reason, spending by one or more of these groups increases, aggregate demand shifts out, the price level rises. Now there's more profit. More profit means more production. Production temporarily increases as workers are asked to work overtime and machines are run more intensely. But eventually, that increase in demand for raw materials, parts, components, and labor will cause the prices of these goods to rise. And then as costs rise, profits disappear, less production, and the only change is 2 increases in the price level. Okay?
So you suffer inflation twice.
Yes. The first kind of inflation that we're going to get when aggregate demand shifts out is that demand pull, okay? So this is demand pull. And then as costs begin to rise to catch up with the increase in the price level, and the supply curve shifts in, and the price level goes up again, we get what's called cost push inflation. So in the classical model, shifts in aggregate demand in the long run cannot change real GDP. That's 100% determined by resources. Once we are at full employment, we are out on the curve, we cannot produce under normal circumstances anymore. Doesn't matter what happens to prices. Julio?
So I have heard before that when people is working overtime because the economy is good and everybody's happy, but that's not true at all.
Oh, it's not?
According to this, because if they're working overtime, it's because inflation is coming up at some point.
Maybe. Do people really anticipate that this is going to happen? No, I don't think so. Government may, people that make policy may, but the average person, do they say, I'm working overtime, making tons of money, maybe I should save some because inflation's going to go up and I may have to pay higher prices? Not so sure. Not so sure about that. Certainly when you're working overtime and you're making time and a half, right, that's what they pay. You know how long is the work week here in the United States, after which you have to pay overtime? 40 hours. Do you know what it is in Europe? 36 hours, right? After 36 hours, they have to pay you overtime in Europe. Plus, you get way more vacation. Try to find a European in August. There's nobody at work. They're all at the beach. Cost push, yes, they're caused by adjustments being made. As costs rise, then the supply curve shifts in, right? Okay. Now, what happens in the opposite situation, where we start at a point of equilibrium, but let's say that for whatever reason, the economies of our trading partners go downhill, okay? That they weaken, they go into a recession. Not only will they buy fewer of their own goods, but they'll buy fewer of ours. So let's say exports decrease, okay? If exports decrease, now the aggregate demand curve is going to shift in. And what's going to happen? Well, the first thing that happened is there's a decrease in the price level, and if this represents full employment GDP, any GDP to the right is overtime, more than full employment. Any GDP to the left, now we're back here, okay? Any GDP to the left means less than full employment, meaning unemployment. We're in a recession, okay? When we were out here, the difference between full employment and what we were producing in overtime, expansionary gap, okay, or inflationary. Here, we have a different gap. It's called either contractionary. This is not writing anywhere near where my pen is going. I can't. Contractionary, or what does your book call it? Recessionary? Yeah. Or recessionary gap, okay? What's happening here? We are now, right, inside the curve, inside the PPC, right? So, aggregate demand shifts in, real GDP falls, the price level falls, unemployment rises, okay? Unemployment rises. Now what's going to happen in this classical model? Well, let's say this is the labor market. We don't need, if we're not selling as much, we don't need as many people. So we begin to lay people off. Okay? Demand for labor decreases. And in this classical model, what's going to happen to the price of labor? It's going to fall. Okay? We could do the same thing for raw materials, parts, and components. This is how much, when we were producing at full employment, that's how much of that stuff we needed. Now we don't need as much. So prices of these goods are now going to drop, okay? This is the fundamental difference. Right here is the difference between Keynes and classical. In this model, this classical model, wages and prices are fully flexible, free to move up and down in response to shortages and surpluses, okay? So that if there's a surplus of labor, the price of labor will come down. If there's a surplus of raw materials because we're producing less, these prices will fall, okay? Keynes said not going to happen, all right? This is the fundamental difference, that wages will not come down. Even if we have a surplus of labor, they will not come down. And because the price of labor cannot come down, the price of raw materials, parts, components produced with that labor cannot come down either, okay? We'll talk about that in a minute. But in this classical model, wages and prices are free to move up and down, okay? So the price of labor, the price of raw materials, parts, components are all going to begin to drop because of that decrease in demand for those goods, because we're not producing as much. As costs now begin to fall, what happens to profits? They now begin to rise. And what will happen with the supply curve? It will shift back out, okay? And what's going to happen? We end up back here at the full employment level of real GDP, and the only other thing is another reduction in the price level, okay? They have names for inflation, but they don't have any names for deflation, okay? There's no cost pull, demand push deflation, no, all right? Okay, so in this classical model, we always end up at full employment. If we go out here, if we start here, we move to here, and then we go back to there, okay? And the only change is change in the price level, okay? If aggregate demand shifts in, we go from here to here, unemployment, less than full employment GDP, costs will begin to fall, and then supply curve will shift back out, and we go back here, everybody gets their job back, we're back at full employment, okay? So the economy is self-regulating. Important things to remember as far as the classical model is concerned. Okay? Wages and prices. You sure? I'm going to blow this thing up. Okay? In fact, I suppose I can't change it. Wages and prices are flexible, fully flexible, free to move up and down. Okay? Long-term unemployment, not possible. Adjustments will bring us back to full employment. Okay? Real GDP is 100% supply determined. Specifically, the position of the long-run aggregate supply curve. Resources, not prices, not demand, determines what we can produce, right? If we are perfectly efficient, using all of our available resources, we're out here on the curve, okay? Not there. Okay? 4, delta, changes in aggregate demand cannot change real GDP. Okay, that's supposed to be a delta. Okay? 5, changes in AD only change the price level. Okay? That if LRAS is vertical, changes in aggregate demand cannot change anything but the price level. Okay? 6. 5 is change. That's supposed to be a D, a delta. Changes in aggregate demand only change the price level. Okay? Economy is self-regulating, self-adjusting. For that reason, no government action required. It's supposed to say required. Wages and prices are fully flexible. Long-term unemployment is not possible. Real GDP is 100% determined by supply, resources, and technology. Changes in aggregate demand cannot change real GDP. They can only change the price level. Okay? And the economy is self-regulating. Remember, any position to the right or the left of full employment, of long run, is temporary. Adjustments will be made to bring us back to long run equilibrium on the full employment line. Okay? So no government action is required. You'll get your job back eventually. Right? And as Keynes said, I don't care if this model is right or not, we need government action anyway. He was a big believer in fiscal policy, government taking actions to spend more money or to cut taxes on people so that they spend more money to pick up the economy. And we're going to show you why right now. Okay? All right with this? Okay. Now, Keynes came along and said, Wade, first, the most biggest difference, okay? See, let's talk about the classical economists first, right? Classical economics had its origins in the 1700s, okay? Lots of ancient famous economists. We've already talked about one, Adam Smith, right? Wrote that book, Wealth of Nations, in 1776. There were a whole mess of other ones. I don't know a lot about many of them, honestly. I do know there was a guy named Malthus, Thomas Malthus, who believed that we would end up, all of us, working for less than minimum wage. that there would be, the output would be insufficient to keep everybody employed, okay, at a reasonable level, that people would end up, there'd be way too much labor, manufacturers would be able to exploit labor, you would work for just enough to keep yourself alive. It was a really horrible vision of the future, okay. He was wrong, fortunately, at least so far, okay, in that technological advances have increased production. In fact, as this later guy says, J.B. Say, another Jean-Bertrand Say, a Frenchman who also economist said, what did Say say? Say said that there should not be any unemployment, that there should not be any overcapacity, that people will be willing to work for less rather than be surplus labor, that we'd be willing to sell our goods for less rather than not sell it at all, okay? What Say said was that supply creates its own demand, that the very act of engaging in supplying provides us with the means to demand other goods, that we only produce more than what we need for ourselves because we have a desire to buy other things, so that we can sell that surplus, those extra goods, which provides us with the means to buy other goods, okay? That supply creates its own demand. My work, my production creates the means for me to buy other things that I desire, okay? No production, no overproduction. Again, anything that's in surplus, prices will fall, and no unemployment. If you are unemployed, you'll work for less, okay? Right? Now, the classical model was good up until about the 1930s. And they said that, remember, that unemployment, long-term unemployment is not possible. Well, we know what happened in the 1930s, right? We had this Great Depression where we had large amounts of people unemployed and not unable to find jobs, okay? So Keynes said, how can I explain this? And what he said was that there was a fundamental change in the nature of the American economy at the end of the 1800s and beginning part of the 20th century. That because of unions, okay, the prices of labor could not easily come down. And that's generally true if you belong to a union. I belong to a union, right? And could I, if I was going to get laid off, could I go to the college and say, listen, I'll work for less than this? Okay? Sorry. Union contract says if you work and you belong to the union, this is what we have to pay you. When times are bad, oftentimes the unions will give up on other things like benefits and the like, but pretty rare that they're going to give up on price of labor, okay, that they're going to allow that to fall, all right? Okay? So thanks to unions and long-term contracts with other people not in unions, that even if there is a surplus of labor, the price of labor is not going to come down. Now, in Keynes's time, a lot more people belonged to unions, okay? Maybe 40, 50% of the working population in the country, the United States, was unionized, okay? Today, that's not the case. 10, 15% of people are in the union, right? But what do we have that Keynes didn't have? What keeps wages from falling? Minimum wage, okay? So we have minimum wage, which Keynes did not have, but he had a lot more people belonging to unions, right? I'm a union man. Oh, I'm a union man. I know that's what I am. And I don't give a damn for the company plan, because I'm a union man. Oh, they won't get me, I'm part of the union. They won't get me, I'm part of the union. They won't get me, I'm part of the union, till the day I die. Till the day I die. I hate the union. I got no use for unions, okay? None whatsoever. In fact, I got really screwed big time because I belonged to the union. You know what happened to me? I think 3 years after I started working here at the college, they decided to do a major study between community college professors in Massachusetts versus community college professors in the 10 other largest industrial states, okay? And what they found out was that most places, they were working, we were only teaching 4 courses a semester then, okay? Most places they were teaching 5, but they were making more money, So they decided they would make an adjustment. They would make us teach 5 courses a semester, but they would adjust our salaries. Okay? This is a union-requested study. If you had been a teacher in the community college system, okay, you got something like 10 points, I think, 10 points a year, okay, for every year you've been a teacher, okay, 10 years teaching. I'm sorry, 10 for every year teaching, all right? You got 3 points for every year of experience outside teaching for a maximum of 30 points, okay? And then if you had a PhD, you got extra points. If you had a master's degree, you got nothing. If you had less than master's, you lost points, okay? I had been in business 18 years. 3 points, I would have been 54 points. They gave me 30, okay? And I'd only been in teaching 2 years, so I got another 20 points. So I got a total of 50 points. Somebody who had been here at the college teaching for 12 years got 120 points. Okay? This person got another course and got a $12,000 raise. Okay? This person, me, I got another course and I got 0. They increased my workload by 25% and they gave me nothing. Thank you, union. Good job. That helped me out a lot. They eventually did make an adjustment, but it took them 5 years to get around to it. Finally pay me some. Yeah, I know. So what do you think that did to my incentive? I'm doing a terrible job from now on. You know what it does mean, okay? The person next door to me does a fabulous job, all right? And I do a lousy job. Who's going to get the better raise? Well, we know. We're both going to get exactly the same because we're in the union. The union negotiates the pay, and we get the same. So he does a fabulous job. He gets 5%. I do a lousy job. I get 5%. Do I have an incentive to do a great job? Hell no. That's unfortunately the case with unions. It destroys the incentive for people to do better. They don't, in fact, it encourages them to do less, to be mediocre or worse, okay? If I do a lousy job and I get a big raise, like, great, I did a lousy job, I still get a big raise, right? If I kill myself and I get the same raise, it's like, well, why should I? He's doing a lousy job. Did I tell you about the guy that used to teach economics here? God rest his soul, he's dead now, okay? He used to teach economics here. At the end of the semester, out of a class of 30 students, only 5 of them would still be in the class, okay? Everybody else would have quit going because his attitude was, you read the chapter? Do you have any questions? No? No questions? All right, I'm going to talk about politics. He was a socialist. And that's all he would do. And most people, him and the other professor who teaches economics here were not passing anybody. Everybody was getting F's and D's. Only like, yeah, it was terrible, okay? And I teach the international business courses here. Without passing economics, you couldn't take international business. Well, they were killing me. But fortunately, he retired, and everybody passes now. All right, so what Keynes said was, even if there is a surplus of labor, okay, if demand for labor shifts in, the price of labor is not going to come down, okay, thanks to union contracts and other long-term contracts. Today, that would be the case with minimum wage, right? If demand for minimum wage labor decreases, the minimum wage is not going to come down in order to absorb that surplus, right? Okay. So it's possible in Keynes's model to be long-term involuntarily unemployed. The wage rate cannot come down. What's going to happen? Now, in the classical model, okay, if we are back here, right, less than full employment, there's a surplus of labor, surplus of other raw materials. As demand for these shifts in, the prices of these are going to come down, costs are going to fall, supply curve's going to shift back out, we're going to go back to full employment, okay? But in Keynes's model, the short-run aggregate supply curve is not upward sloping. In order for this to work, the price level has to be able to come down, okay? But in Keynes's model, it's not going to happen. If aggregate demand shifts in, prices are not going to come down. And here's why. Remember that when we're producing less, the prices of raw materials, parts, and components are going to drop also, in addition to the price of labor. But in Keynes's model, nothing is going to come down. What he said was wages and prices are sticky downwards. Yeah, they might come down a little bit over the course of time, but they're not going to drop by much, and it's not going to be very quick, okay? That they are sticky downwards. Think of it this way. Let's say that you're a minimum wage worker. You're earning $8 an hour. Okay? And let's say that in each hour, let's say you're a coal worker, okay, in the coal mines. And you can produce 1 ton of coal in an hour. So what did that ton of coal cost you? $8 bucks. All right, let's say that's the only input involved. If aggregate demand shifts in, and let's say this is coal, okay? Can the price of coal come down if we buy less coal? No, because I have to pay you $8 an hour no matter what to produce a ton of coal. So that decrease in demand for coal, thanks to decreased production, we're in this recession, even though the demand for coal is decreased, the price of coal is not going to come down, because I have to pay you, no matter how many tons of coal you produce, $8 an hour, okay? And if that's the price of a ton of coal, the price of coal is not going to come down, because I can't pay you less, I can't charge less for coal. So what happens is minimum wage and other, in Keynes's world, long-term union contracts results in a price floor. Prices cannot come down, okay? If I can't pay you less, if I have 100 people and each one produces 1 ton of coal, and now you're only buying 50, yeah, well, I'll lay 50 people off, but those other 50 are still going to get paid $8 an hour. I'm still going to charge you $8 per ton, no matter what, okay? So if I can't pay labor less, then the cost of the raw materials produced with that labor can't fall either. So that decrease in demand for raw materials, parts, and components is going to end up in surpluses only. Price is not going to come down. We'll have a permanent surplus, excess capacity, okay? So in Keynes's world, the short-run aggregate supply curve is not upward sloping like that one. It is horizontal. It is horizontal. Short-run aggregate supply curve is horizontal, okay? Wages and prices cannot come down. In this model, if we start here with aggregate demand, we're at full employment, and for whatever reason, the economies of our trading partners go into recession, AD shifts in this model, price level will fall, and then the costs fall, supply curve shifts back out. It can't happen in this model. If we are here with AD, and AD shifts in because of whatever reason, the economies of the rest of the world go into recession, okay, then aggregate demand is going to shift in. And what will happen is that real GDP and real GDP will fall, and the unemployment level will rise, but the price level is not going to come down. We can't make this adjustment. This adjustment that gets made here, when demand for raw materials, labor and parts and components decreases, the prices of these fall, costs fall, aggregate supply shifts out, more production, more labor, back to full employment. Can't happen here, okay? Because costs can't fall, profits can't increase, supply curve's not going to shift out, we're not going to go back to full employment. We are going to be stuck here unless government takes some action. Government has to move aggregate demand back out to bring us back towards full employment, okay? He's okay with this part, all right? But Keynes says this part of the short-run aggregate supply curve is horizontal. All right? Now, what does this show you? Well, remember, in our long run, in our classical model, in our classical model, real GDP depends upon supply, long-run aggregate supply. Resources, technology determines GDP. And shifts in aggregate demand can't change GDP, okay? They can only change the price level. Just the opposite here. Real GDP depends upon aggregate demand. If aggregate demand is here, real GDP is there. But if AD shifts into here, real GDP falls by an equal amount, okay? So in the Keynesian model, real GDP is determined by the position of aggregate demand. Classical model, it's determined by the position of the long-run aggregate supply curve. Supply versus demand. Shifts in aggregate demand only change the price level. Shifts in aggregate demand in Keynes's model cannot change the price level. Shifts in AD can't change real GDP in the classical model. Shifts in AD only change real GDP in the Keynesian model, okay? This is self-regulating. If we are out here, we end up here. If we're back here, we end up down here, always back on the curve at full employment. Here, there's nothing that's going to bring us back to full employment. No adjustments are going to be made. Government action is required. Government, remember, government has two choices. They can cut our taxes so that consumer spending rises, AD shifts out, okay? Or they can increase their own spending. Or, what else can they do? They can now, this Keynes's world, in Keynes's time, these were really the only two choices, okay? To stimulate the economy, government could increase its spending, or government could cut our taxes, and we could spend more. Okay? But we know that today we have more tools. Okay? We can cause interest rates to fall by pumping money into the economy. Banks have too much cash to lend that out. They got to lower interest rates. Interest rates fall. More business investment opportunities are profitable. More investment will take place. Aggregate demand shifts out. So we have another tool. We can work on interest rates to stimulate the economy. Interest rates fall, more demand, okay? Real GDP increases. Or, what else can we do? We can artificially manipulate the price of the dollar, okay, to increase exports. If the government goes out and sells dollars, right, goes out and increases the supply of dollars, then the price of the dollar will fall. Our goods will go from $1 equals 200 pesos to $1 equals 100 pesos. Now what's going to happen? Mexicans are going to buy more goods from us because they can get twice as much for their peso now, okay? So the government can take certain actions. In fact, Japan often in the past tries to stimulate its economy by increasing its exports. China today, one of the reasons why China today enjoys such a large trade surplus with the United States is that they artificially interfere in the currency markets in order to keep the value of their currency, the yuan, right, artificially low, to keep their goods priced extremely low and keep foreign goods essentially priced high. And this is an area that we are going to be talking with the Chinese about and should be talking about it, okay? They claim they don't do this, but that's nonsense. They do it, okay? They do it. They go out and they sell yuan and they buy dollars and yen and euros, pushing those prices up and keeping theirs down so that their goods are cheaper and they sell more, okay? So some actions required according to Keynes. The wages and prices, because they cannot come down, costs can't fall. So when we are in a recession, when we have unemployment and unused capacity, not using as much raw materials or as labor, prices are not going to come down. It doesn't matter. So we're going to be stuck. And what happens actually is that if we are here near, let's say we're here near full employment, And we shift in here. AD shifts in, okay? Because of a decrease in demand for goods for whatever reason. We get a little bit nervous. We worry about the future, right? The economy is going into a recession. So what do? We start to spend less money and save more just in case we might lose our job. So what happens? The shifts back in. Now even more people get laid off. Now we begin to panic, right? I'm not spending any money. I'm saving it all because who knows what's going to happen. We might go into this giant recession. So what happens? Government now has to take action to prevent this from happening, prevent this from our panic from occurring, okay? In fact, because we know today that the government will take action, that they will do something, we don't panic. This is called the soothing effect of Keynesian fiscal policy, okay? We know that when things get rough, government's going to begin to take action to try to keep things from getting any rougher and to make things better again. So we're not going to freak out. We're not going to all of a sudden panic and stop spending money altogether, okay? Now, the government had a really hard time with this last recession. In fact, it's been taking quite a while, right, to bring us back to normal employment levels. All right? So if this thing was drawing a little bit better, I would recap this for you. Maybe I should anyway, all right? You wrote the other one down once already. But classical, now what? There we go. Classical, this is going to drive me insane. It's getting so far off, it's ridiculous now. Look at, I'm going to write here, see where it appears. Oh, that's not too bad. I guess the farther down you get, the easier it gets, okay? Classical wages and prices are fully flexible, okay? Keynes, wages and prices are sticky. Down. Oh, this is going to drive me insane. Okay. 2, real GDP, 100% supply. Okay. Real GDP, 100% demand. Okay. Changes in AD only change price level. Shifts in aggregate demand will only change the price level. Okay. Keynes, changes in AD cannot change the price level. Okay. So changes in AD, okay, cannot change real GDP. Okay. Changes in AD are 100% reflected in changes to real GDP, right? It's the difference between a horizontal line and a vertical line. Okay? Changes in AD here can only change the price level, not GDP. Changes in AD here cannot change the price level, can only change real GDP. Okay? All right? Keynes, horizontal, shifting along the curve. All right? Here, vertical, shifting up and down the curve. 5, long-term, involuntary unemployment, not possible. Keynes, long-term, involuntary unemployment is possible. Okay. 6, econ is self-regulating. This is really difficult. That's supposed to say self-regulating. All right. Okay. Keynes econ cannot fix itself. No government action required. No government action required because the economy is. I'm going to kill this board. Okay? Keynes, government action is necessary. Okay? Exactly the opposite. Like I told you guys, they said right, he said left. They said up, he said down. Okay? Wages and prices are flexible? No, they're not. Real GDP is 100% supply? No, it isn't. Changes in aggregate demand can't change the price, only change the price level? No, it doesn't. Okay? And so on and so forth. Exactly the opposite. And again, it all has to do with the fact that classical economy, vertical, Keynes economy, horizontal. Classical, long-run vertical, Keynes, short-run horizontal. Okay? All right? All right. What else did we say? I told you what happened in the, when we were going through that simple circular flow, right? I said that if people save money, okay, according to the classical model, any money we save, a leakage out of the circular flow, will be injected back into the circular flow by business, right? That interest rates, may I? You guys done with this? Okay. That interest rates will always adjust, okay, to ensure that the quantity supplied of money is equal to the quantity demanded, that there wouldn't be any mismatch at all. And again, I told you what Keynes said about that how much we save, yeah, maybe how much business borrows and invests does depend on interest rates, but how much we save does not. We save more if we're earning more, we save less if we're earning less, no matter what interest rates are. That if we're making a ton of money, no matter what interest rates are, we'll save some of it. But if we can't make enough money to make ends meet, then no matter what interest rates are, we won't save any, okay? All right? So in the credit, what else did the classical economists made a number of assumptions. There were no monopolies, okay? This couldn't work if that adjustment process couldn't work if all these businesses were monopolies. They wouldn't have to reduce prices at all, okay? Costs wouldn't fall. So pure competition exists. Wages, this is the key one, wages and prices are fully flexible, free to move up and down based on surpluses and shortages. People are motivated by self-interest. This is something we talked about very early on, right? That we assume people do things because they intend to make themselves better off, that they act in their own rational self-interest, that they don't intentionally make decisions that are going to lead them to be worse off, okay? That's not rational, okay? We don't intentionally step out in front of the bus when it's driving down the street, okay? And people cannot be fooled by money illusion, okay? I have money illusion. I have the illusion I have money. Right? But that's not what it means. What money illusion, and I'm not sure the classical economists are right on this, okay? I'm not sure people cannot be fooled by money illusion. I believe that they can be fooled by money illusion. What this means is that people react to, if you are not fooled by money illusion, then you react to changes in relative prices. That if you get a 10% raise and all prices went up by 15%, you know you're not better off, okay? You're worse off. That if the price of gasoline goes up by 10% and all other prices go up by 10% and we end up buying less gasoline because the price went up, we'd be fooled by money illusion, okay? We recognize changes in relative prices. We don't necessarily react to changes in absolute, okay? Does that make sense? Your boss says, I got good news. You're getting a 5% raise and you know inflation is 6%. You're not going to be happy, okay? All right. So we cannot be fooled by money illusion. And again, I'm not sure that's true. I think when some prices go up, people buy less of it, even though all prices might be going up. And gasoline might be a perfect example. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Okay? Anything else in here that we need to talk about that we didn't already talk about? Shifts in the aggregate supply curves. Okay. We'll look at a lot of when we look at stuff, it's going to be in the classical model. Okay, I don't know, just the way it is. Both of these curves, short run and long run, can shift out. Okay? What are the things that make supply curves shift outwards? Changes in costs and profits, right? Will that shift the long run supply curve though? No. Remember, once we are out here, okay, right? That determines the position of the long run aggregate supply curve. Remember, this doesn't say anything about prices or profits or costs, right? Okay. So the long run, remember, in the long run, what we can produce depends upon resources and technology, not prices, okay, not profits. So changes in costs and profits aren't going to shift the long run, but they will shift the short run. The short run really is the summary of all supply curves, okay? Right? That the same things that move a supply curve for a product will shift the short run supply curve also, meaning changes in costs and profits, okay? As costs fall, we'll produce more. Aggregate supply will shift out. As costs rise, we produce less. Short run aggregate supply curve will shift in, okay? So the short run aggregate supply curve will react to changes in profits and costs. But the long run, no. The long run only reacts to changes in resources and technology, right? If we get more technology, better technology, more resources, it'll shift out. Long run will shift out, okay? Will that shift out the short run if we get more resources and better technology now? Hell yeah, okay? So changes in resources and technology will shift both curves, okay? But changes in costs and profits will only shift the short run, okay? All right? Okay? So advances in technology and increased resources allow us to produce more now and in the long run. But changes in costs and profits cannot change resources or technology, but they can cause us to produce temporarily more or less, okay? Cause the supply curve to shift in or out, all right? We looked at that stuff. We talked about open economy. We didn't really talk about open economy, okay? And remember, in order to have an open economy effect, you have to have an open economy. You have to trade. You have to import and export, okay? Now, let's look at what happens. We're just going to look at the short run, not the long run, okay? We'll look at AD and short run aggregate supply. Let's say that the price of the dollar goes from one foreign currency to it's supposed to be $1. I'm going to kill this thing. Can we reset this after the break? Because it doesn't seem to be working right. Okay. So a dollar, because what changes the price of a currency? What makes it increase or decrease in value? Supply and demand, just like everything else. Okay. Why would you want to buy pesos? Mexican pesos? You want to buy some Mexican tequila. Okay? They don't take dólares, only pesos. Okay? So if you want to buy a lot of Mexican tequila, you got to sell a bunch of dollars and buy pesos in order to get that tequila. All right? So there are lots of things that if you're anybody a finance major, majoring in finance here? Yeah, you? When you get to money and banking, okay, if your teacher does the foreign exchange, I always did the foreign exchange section because I tried to internationalize it as much as possible. But the finance person, maybe not. But they'll say there's lots of reasons why the dollar, if we have an increased desire to own foreign goods, then we need more foreign money, okay? If we want to make more investments because the interest rates are higher in different countries, then we need to buy more of their currencies, okay? In fact, in the short run, it's changes in differences in real interest rates that cause money to move from one country to another for the most part. You can make a better interest rate in Mexico than you can in the United States. What do you want to do? You want to invest in Mexico, but to do so, you've got to sell dollars and buy pesos, okay? And that changes in supply and demand. Or maybe you're worried about the revolution, right? And you're in Mexico, and you're worried that the country's going to go down the tubes. So what do you want to do? You want to put your money in Europe or in the United States or in Japan. So you sell pesos and you buy these foreign currencies, okay? So as these things happen, the prices of currencies are constantly moving up and down, as many of you know, right? Okay, so what's going to happen if it goes from $1 equals one foreign currency to $1 equals two foreign currency now? Okay, what's going to happen to exports from the United States if the value of the dollar? Now this is a stronger dollar, meaning it takes more of a foreign currency to buy a dollar now. Okay, so the dollar has strengthened. So what's going to happen, Michael? Yes, exports will decrease, right? And aggregate demand will shift in. Now, what about imports of, now export, this would be exports of manufactured goods, okay? What if this is, we're talking about the Saudi Riyal here, okay? Saudi Riyal. It goes from $1 used to equal one Saudi Riyal, now it's 2 Saudi Riyals. What's going to happen to the price of oil? No, it's going to go down. In the past, we used to only get 1 Saudi Riyal's worth of oil for our dollar. Now we get 2, twice as much. So the price of oil comes down. What's going to happen to the supply curve? If costs begin to fall, then supply curve is going to shift down. Okay? And what will happen to the price level in the economy? It will fall. Okay? And what will happen to real GDP? Huh? Remember? Both curves are shifting at the same time. We know what's going to happen here. We don't know. Okay? It depends on whether the effect, if we're talking about primarily the Saudi Riyal, okay, what's going to happen? Do they buy a lot of stuff from us? Do the Saudis buy much stuff from us? No, not that much. So aggregate demand's not going to shift in by very much. But do we buy a ton of imports from Saudi Arabia? Absolutely. So aggregate supply is going to shift out by a lot. In this case, real GDP would go up. But if we're talking about, say, the euro, okay, where is the major effect going to be, on aggregate demand or on aggregate supply? Do we import raw materials, parts, and components from Europe? Not very much. Do we import finished goods, manufactured goods? Absolutely. Okay? I'm sorry, not import. Do we export manufactured goods to Europe? Yes, tons of it. So if this happens, then aggregate demand will shift in by a lot, but supply is not going to shift out by much because we don't buy much from the Europeans in terms of raw materials, okay? In which case, real GDP would fall. So unless you know whether the effect is more on supply or demand, and you'll never know that, you won't be able to tell what's going to be the effect on GDP, but you will be able to tell what happens to the price level, okay?